Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So, for today's talk, um, as usual, I was wondering what should I talk about for this month's retreat. Recently, we had a Dhamma discussion, very recently actually, regarding meditation once again. And this topic of techniques, meditation techniques came up. Um, and their meditation techniques and their usage, their application in modern worlds, uh, if you like. Um, can be scientific, it can be any other application. So that led me to talk about meditation techniques today. So meditation techniques. So if you look at the early Buddhism, we don't find that term or that kind of a terminology, that sort of a way of referring uh, to meditation or to practice. The early Buddhists, including Buddha, it seems that the suttas suggest that uh, they saw it as a path. It is more like a holistic, all-encompassing, holistic path rather than a single technique which you can put into a box and say, look, if you develop this, this will lead to nibbana, or this will lead to even like lesser result, like stress reduction and other applications in the modern world, uh, and in the applications of Buddhist meditation. So it's good that we have a clear idea about uh, uh, what you find in early Buddhism, and how these things develop over the time. So as I mentioned, uh, it was a path to begin with. Lord Buddha, in his first Dhamma discourse, he talks about a path. He talks about two extremes first, and then he immediately says that there is this middle way, and the middle way is the Noble Eightfold Path. These terms, these terminologies are so classical. We have heard about these things a lot, to the point sometimes we wonder actually whether it is that portable, if you like, or that sort of easy to carry around and practice in a daily, day-to-day sort of situation, because they sound so classic, so old and old. We respect these terms and ideas, but somehow we feel like uh, uh, having this short, sort of like this short eats kind of a culture. Instead of having a whole meal, I don't have time to sort of uh, have a full meal, so why not kind of grab a snack and move on? There are so many things to attend. So we see the same attitude over the years, over the time. Actually, people are struggling more and more with their time. So why not get the basics, get the essentials rather. Let's group together all the essentials and something like that. See, because when you look at a certain technique, so there are so many techniques. Like, at least we would like to call them like that. When you see these teachers teach their meditations, their method, uh, we tend to look at these things as techniques. It's pretty what do you call in uh, you reduce uh, that method or that practice into something more lesser when you call it a technique. It's not just a technique. When you look at the suttas, it's rather a more it's like a big a program. It's a lifelong project. That's why I think Lord Buddha preferred the term a path. So, and you see, there is this another term Lord Buddha uses as gradual training, sikha. Instead of, you see sometimes the mantra is the foremost, and sometimes Lord Buddha explains this set of practices which starts from you renunciate, you basically giving up your things, start to practice. Even as a lay person, you need to give up certain things in order to get into your meditation practice. To do a serious practitioner, it demands certain things to give up. So you give up these things, and then you start with your sila and all these gradual uh, path Lord Buddha explains in these suttas. Especially you find these things in the Majjhima Nikaya. Many suttas talks about the same thing. There are little differences, slight differences though. So Lord Buddha would call them as gradual training. It's not a technique. When you look at even at the face value, you see it's a technique is not a gradual training. Technique is more like it implies a smaller, sort of more portable. Uh, if that can be portable at all. So gradual training is another term you see in the sutta. And then uh, there are these other uh, framework like explanations sometimes you see in the suttas. It seems like these things competing each other sometimes. When you look at these things, it seems like, oh, one thing sometimes little independent from another, rather than overlapping or rather than explaining in detail a certain thing in the path. We feel like like the next thing I wanted to discuss is that this Majjhima, the second sutta, I guess, uh, Sabbasa Sutta. Now, when you look at the Sabbasa Sutta, Lord talks about these 7 practices you can take up in order to uh, uh, get rid of or basically attain Nibbana. All the asavas are uh, sort of gone, which implies the Nibbana. So in the Sabbasa Sutta, Lord Buddha talks about these 7 practices. So let me uh, read this thing in a brief way, just to give you an idea. Some of you may have read this thing before, but I'll go through this again briefly. So, Majjhima second sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya. So this is about all the asavas. So, Lord Buddha says, mendicants or the bhikkhus, I will teach you the explanation of restraint of all defilements. Listen and apply your mind well. I will speak. And then Lord Buddha talks about these 7 aspects of giving up all the defilements, all the asavas. The first thing is that defilements given up by seeing. Uh, so basically, there is a big explanation about this first section. But if I summarize, basically, what it means is that you do yonaso manasikara, you apply your mind and try to have an idea first. Try to understand this teaching of. So the passage goes like this: they rationally apply the mind. The rational application of mind is the yonaso manasikara again, the translation of it. This is suffering. This is the origin of suffering. This is the cessation of suffering. This is the practice that leads to the cessation of suffering. And as they do so, they give up three fetters: substantialist view, doubt, and misapprehension of percepts and observances, which is sakkaya ditthi, vicikicca, silabata paramasu. So these are called defilements that should be given up by seeing. So you see, contemplating is the first method, if you like. One of these methods, the 7 methods Lord Buddha talks about, giving up all the defilements. If you, uh, when Lord Buddha explains the Noble Eightfold Path, he says, okay, uh, towards the Nibbana, these are the 8 steps along the road, on this path. And so, and Lord Buddha says, in this explanation, he explained the same thing in a different way. Now, instead of talking about the key components of you know of what the path means, he basically explains the same goal in terms of getting rid of your defilements, which is the same thing basically. The Eightfold Path basically aspire to the same result. So here, the first thing is that you need to contemplate. That's the one practice you need to take up. The second thing Lord Buddha says, you need to be uh, you need to develop restraint. Defilements given up by restraint. Here, Lord Buddha explains it like this. Uh, Take a bhikkhu who, reflecting rationally, lives restraining the faculty of eye for the distressing and feverish defilements that might arise in someone who lives without restraint of the eye faculty. uh, do not arise when there is such restraint. So basically, yeah, it's kind of a classic way of explaining. Way of speaking, which is like sometimes very difficult to follow in English. When I read out, I understand. So basically, what he says here is that um, if you restrain yourself, the defilement leads to this feverish, uh, uh, the feverish defilements would arise if you do not restrain yourself. So if you are restraining yourself, these feverish defilements would not arise. So basically, the sense restraint, Indriya Samvara Sila, sometimes you hear in Pali. So you try to exercise certain restraint for your eyes, ears, and all the other inputs, all the sense organs. So um, a situation like this today is something, you are restraining yourself instead of, this is the weekend. There are so many things you could do today instead of uh, you know doing those things. You try to restrain yourself a little, you decided to meditate instead of doing something else. So there's always some kind of a restraint involved in meditation and in the Buddhist practice. I think it's a more clear point there. And the third one, so the first one is the Yoniso Manasikara, the rational application of your mind. The second one is restraining. The third one is that the certain defilements uh, were handled or tackled by giving up using certain things. Lord Buddha says, and what are the defilements that should be given up by using? So you give. Let me say it once again. Maybe I kind of read it little kind of inaccurately here. So there are these defilements which will arise if you do not use these things. So it's middle way. Remember, no, we are not kind of talking about extremes. There are like other explanations, which covers what middle way is. One of the thing is that you are not kind of you try to make a fair use of certain requisites and stuff. So if you do not use them, that's also suffers. That will suffer your practice, your sort of sustenance as a human being in general. So, so then Lord Buddha says, reflecting rationally, while you are reflecting, while you're contemplating, they make use of the alms food, and they make use of the lodgings, and they make use of medicines, and they make use of robes as well. So this the four parikaras, the four pirikaras. Usually it is in the context of monastics, right? The chivara, mindapatha, the senasana, and the fourth one as the medicines. It's not just for the monks, but for anyone. These four are like the basic requisites to support yourself as a practitioner. So one has to use these things. If you are not using these things, that will lead to a different kinds of defilements. That's also a problem. So you see, it's not always like restraint. Sometimes you have to sort of make use certain things just to kind of be in the middle. So that's the third one. The fourth one is that you give up certain defilements by enduring things. And what are the defilements that should be given up by enduring? So they with their yoniso manasika, they endure cold, heat, hunger, and thirst, and they endure the touch of flies, mosquitoes, wind, sun, and reptiles. They endure rude and unwelcome criticism, and they put up with physical pain, sharp, severe, acute, unpleasant, disagreeable, and life-threatening. For the distressing and feverish defilements that might arise in someone who lives without enduring these things do not arise when they are endured. I think that sentence is clear, isn't it? So, if you are enduring these things, these defilements will not arise. If you are not enduring these things, certain defilements will arise. So this is the fourth strategy, if you like, to tackle the certain defilements. So if I summarize once again, by contemplating you tackle certain defilements by being restrained and by using certain requisites, and as a fourth by enduring, you tackle these things. And the fifth one, Lord Buddha says, and what are the defilements that should be given up by avoiding things? Now, there are certain things we're supposed to avoid in order to tackle certain defilements. Reflecting rationally, a monk or a practitioner avoids a wild elephant, a wild horse, a wild ox, a wild dog, a snake, a stump, thorny ground, a pit, a cliff, a swamp, and a sewer. Reflecting rationally, they avoid sitting on inappropriate seats, walking in inappropriate neighborhoods, and mixing with bad friends. Whatever sensible spiritual companions would believe to be a bad setting. So what here the Pali term is the Pandita. Whoever these sensible people uh, uh, declare, these things, these people would declare as unsuitable, you avoid going, you avoid uh, uh, being in such situations. That's the summary. So you see, otherwise you get into trouble basically. So that's how you avoid certain defilements by avoiding altogether. Otherwise, sometimes you see that people take unnecessary risks and get into trouble afterwards. So I think it's also very clear to you this fifth point, given defilements given up by avoiding, and the sixth one, defilements given up by dispelling. Vinodana Padabha in Pali. Dispelling, um, dispelling what? Uh, Reflecting rationally, a practitioner doesn't tolerate a sensual, malicious, or cruel thought that has arisen, but gives it up, gets rid of it, eliminates it, and obliterates it. They don't tolerate any bad, unskillful qualities that have arisen, but give up them, get rid of them, eliminate them, and obliterate them. So, as you can see, this this sensual thoughts and uh, the thoughts on anger, the malicious thoughts and cruel thoughts. Now, these are unskillful. These are akusala uh, arises in your mind. So when these things arise, Lord Buddha says, the idea is that you try to uh, uh, discontinue, make them go away. Discontinue. You try to see, try to contemplate. You need to have wisdom power as well to find how not to tolerate these thoughts. Otherwise, if harbored, it will lead to more and more defilements and more trouble, more and more dukkha. So that's the sixth um, way of tackling defilements. And the seventh one, which is more topical for today's uh, Dhamma talk, which is that defilements given up by developing. In Pali, it is bhavana pahatabba. Now the bhavana here, the term bhavana, the literal meaning is that you develop something, you develop your mind. Now later on, when we hear the term bhavana, the image comes to your mind straight away is that someone actually sitting cross-legged, eyes closed, and doing their formal practice. So when in early Buddhism, when Lord Buddha says bhavana, it doesn't necessarily mean that the formal practice, like people sit and meditate, uh, but you develop your mind. there are these other practices you can take up, and you take the same practice in your sitting posture as well as a formal practice. And what are the defilements that should be given up by developing? A practitioner, reflecting rationally, develops the awakening factors of mindfulness, investigation of principles, energy, rapture, tranquility, immersion, and equanimity, which rely on seclusion, fading away, and cessation, and ripen as letting go. So, one develops 7 bojjhangas, if I put it in that way. Mindfulness, investigation of principles means Dhamma vichay, and so on and so forth. So basically, one develops the 7 bojjhangas. And you see, now in this Sabbasava Sutta, once again, the former practice fits into the seventh aspect of this whole project of getting rid of defilements. So it is not just a one technique. It's just this path, this analogy of path or gradual training is much more suitable when you explain about your practice rather than you are taking up a certain technique. And by if you call it a technique, it will reduce. It's a reductionism. You reduce something big into something very small, less capable. So then this bhavana. Let me move on further into this bhavana pahathabba. You develop these 7 bojjhangas. Lord Buddha talks about in the suttas. He talks about the formal practice. He sees it as 2 aspects. In your formal practice, when I say formal practice, what I mean is that you sit or you walk in a composed manner, and you try to meditate. You practice some kind of a kammatthana. That is formal practice. So when you are developing a kammatthana, in order to develop your mind, in order to bhavana your mind, there are these 2 aspects Lord Buddha talks about. There is this samatha, which is calming aspect, and there is this vipassana, which is the insight aspect. Now, in early days, Lord Buddha explains these 2 as 2 aspects of the same thing. If he's talking about formal practice, he talks about one need to develop these 2 skills in order to succeed in their meditation. Now, if you pay attention to the path, the eightfold path, actually, you see there are these 8 factors, and these 8 factors actually categorized into 3, like sila, samadhi, and the panya. Now, the samadhi, as the term suggests, that suggests basically meditation. If you look at the suttas, you see samadhi includes samma vayama, samma sati, and samma samadhi. So the vayama, the effort, and the mindfulness, and the samadhi, all these 3 regarded as the samadhi practice, so meditation basically. So in order to achieve, if I use that term, in order to get to that stage of samadhi, samma samadhi, which is a landmark in Eightfold Path, uh, you need to develop this calmness and the insight, the samatha and the vipassana. That's how the early Buddhists saw it. So Lord Buddha further says that if there are people among us who can easily calm their minds, but they are not that skilled in seeing things as they are in their minds. They are not that skilled yet. They will get to that, but not yet. And there are people actually who are not that skilled in calming their minds, but they can see through certain things. They understand ideas and things. I understand that. But their practice is not that deep enough to take that understanding into something permanent, something of Magapala or a result like Nibbana. So there are these two categories, in general, as Lord Buddha sees it. And he recommends that whoever skilled in samatha should go to who can develop vipassana and ask for an advice, so that you develop the insight aspect as well. And whoever is skilled in insight should seek for advice from people, the practitioners who are skilled in calming their mind, Lord Buddha says. So time to time, Lord Buddha recommends to do this. So the idea is that you are skilled in both sides, both ways, which is a must. That's how he sees it. And in suttas, when you look at the references to samatha and vipassana, it always mentioned together. Maybe one single time, because of a different context, he explains, he says something regarding the samatha. But other than that, when he talks about the practice in general, these two words actually goes together. They are like pairs in Pali. Grammatically, it nearly a pair of words. Samatha and vipassana. In Sinhala, we use the term yugalapada, right? Something like that. So, so why am I explaining all these things about the samatha and vipassana? So, so that was the idea back then. And later on, after 1,000 years or so, in later literature, you start to see these two aspects of the same thing becomes two different independent kind of methods or standalone things. Like there is this samatha bhavana and there is this vipassana bhavana. For the first time, that is something you notice if you look at this later development in the tradition. So then it in my mind, when I look at these things, I feel that this actually leads this idea, this paradigm of techniques suddenly. Now suddenly there is this samatha bhavana and the vipassana bhavana. At the beginning, it was just bhavana for sake of getting rid of defilements. One of the 7 aspects of getting rid of defilements according to Sabbasa Sutta for the Noble Eightfold Path. So then I think the rest is a history. The people who are familiar with the matter knows that later on this vipassana bhavana became a technique itself, and to the point that a certain aversion, a certain negativity towards the calming, the samatha, uh, uh, declaring that the samatha is just an unnecessary diversion of your practice. you will end up in some kind of a detour if you take up samatha. So suddenly you start to see these techniques, quote unquote, uh, tries to uh, compete each other, which at the beginning it wasn't meant to be competing at all. Lord Buddha was kind of breaking down actually, what are the aspects, you need to develop. So it's good to know the historical development of all these things, in general at least. So then, um, in this discussion and in general also, I was asked, and I'm asked sometimes that how this metta and these other certain practices actually fits in to all this the framework of samatha and the vipassana, or the path in general. Now, if you look at the path, the Noble Eightfold Path, so from the Samma Ditya onwards, then Samma Vayama and Samma Sati. Okay, in the Samma Sati, the breakdown is, the definition is that the Satara Satipatthana, the four uh, uh, practices of mindfulness mentioned there. And there is no such a mention uh, like in the path itself, you don't see the metta somehow mentioned kind of categorically, or even in the samatha vipassana, you don't see like metta where this thing fits in, but yet the metta is there. Lord, you see Lord Buddha prays these things again and again and again, but it seems like somehow these things fragmented. These teachings were for the early Buddhists, it was connected somehow with a common thread, but somehow the common thread was lost. Now these things suddenly you see as fragmented, standalone, sort of on their own kind of teachings. So time to time you visit this next block and the next block and the next block, but somehow uh, we feel like, oh, there must be some kind of a technique somehow at the end of the day we're supposed to stick to, and you develop that. Although we have the respect, although we know about these things. So what was the common thread? If you look at the suttas, the whole project actually revolves around getting rid of defilements, lessening the tanha. Uh, if you look at the first Dhamma discourse, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, Lord Buddha talks about the Four Noble Truths. He basically says that the not only in the first Dhamma talk, but later on he basically supplement this teaching of Four Noble Truths. Basically, what he talks about is that uh, being a Buddhist, basically that your project should be that you are looking for a solution for this problem of dukkha. As a human being, we are subjected to these dukkhas. Lord Buddha says, if there is no such a dukkha, there won't be any Buddha. Lord Buddha says that. In a different sutta, he says that. A great person called Buddha arises because of the context, that because of this context of dukkha, there's this problem. So, as Buddhists, if you are sort of embarking on this project of nibbana, we need to understand actually why we are here in the first place, why we meditate in the first place, or why we practice anything at all, because of the Four Noble Truths. Lord Buddha says there are these four principles that uh, one can't say otherwise, one can't declare otherwise, you can't sort of deny that. It's undeniable. Four principles, if you like, in today's terms. Lord Buddha called it as Arya Satya, Arya Satya, like very sort of a noble sort of a Satya. In those days, that was like a terminology that was like more sensible. For us these days, when we hear the term like noble truths, yeah, it sounds classic, uh, but somehow it doesn't get that much of attention of ours sometimes. But how about we call them as four principles? Like they are very sort of guiding principles, if you like. If you look at the context, if you look at other sutras, that's what it suggests. So there's dukkha, that's the first principle, and what's the second? Because of the attachment, because of this wanting, because of the craving, the dukkha arises. That's the cause of the dukkha. So what's the third principle? If you undercut that wanting, if you get rid of that, if you wear it thin and eventually get rid of that, the problem will be solved. So hence this idea of getting rid of your defilements. It's not just we try to be two goody shoes for the ethics sake, for the sila sake. These things we are doing because we are, you know, we understand that these things they are because of some kind of an attachment. The manifestation of attachments are the defilements. You see it as a defilement, but underneath there's an attachment, craving, wanting, the tanha. So you deal with the defilements, you deal with the tanha, theoretically. I mean, practically as well, but you try to sort of connect these terms and stuff. Get these things into a common framework. Uh, and that is the third principle. You tackle the craving, you tackle defilements. That is the way out of all this trouble. And what is the fourth one? The third one is like a simple statement of what you should be doing. You should be going towards away from actually not towards but away from tanha. That's the third one. And the fourth one basically an explanation, a breakdown of that very strategy, which he explained in the third. The third one is more explained in the fourth one as the path, the Noble Eightfold Path. So even Noble Eightfold Path actually fits into this four noble truths, which is, if you like the four pillars of Buddhism. So the whole thing, whole project of practicing Buddhism actually, stands upon this four pillars. So if you look at your practice in those terms, suddenly, these things make sense. This is the common thread. In whichever way, if you can tackle your attachment, your craving, your wantings, then that's a practice. It doesn't have to be formal practice. Does in your day-to-day other situations also, when you are not doing your formal meditation, your the project is to uh, tackle these things, understand, learn from these things, and you gather all the lessons learned and move on, not to repeat. If you can. And certain things it's very easy to sort of learn and not to repeat. Certain things very hard because they are so ingrained and all. But that needs a training, hence the term the gradual training. So as you can see, a technique quite doesn't cover the whole idea of this project. So to answer this question of how this metta, how these other practices actually fit in, which is not kind of categorically mentioned in the main framework. So Lord Buddha talks about yet another way. He talks about he in his suttas he is so good at explaining the same thing in different aspects, different paradigms, if you like. He visits the same thing in different ways again and again and again. But the common thread is that somehow you are dealing with the second noble truth. You're dealing with the Dhamma. This time, uh, he let me quote another sutta, um, which he uh, summarizes out, the whole practice as to five things, five dynamics, if you like. It's like you basically, he tries to explain these things in a more abstract manner here. He uses the term perceptions. There are these uh, perceptions and things you can do to, to get to your goal. So he's explaining these things in terms of perceptions. So the sutta goes like this. So it's in the Anguttara, the book of 5, 144 sutta at Tikhandaki. It's called Tikhandaki Sutta. Anguttara 5, 144 sutta. At one time, the Buddha was staying near Saketa in Tikhandaki wood. There, the Buddha addressed the mendicants. Where sir? They replied. The Buddha said this. So Ajahn Sujato prefers. I'm reading from the Sutta Central here. So Ajahn Sujato prefers the term mendicants for the monks, but I will sort of switch to monks, which is more kind of familiar for us. Where sir? They replied. The Buddha said this: monks. A monk would do well to mediate from time to time, perceiving the following: the repulsive in the unrepulsive. So time to time, he says, there are these lists of things he is going to explain here. He is mentioning here. The first thing is that you try to perceive uh, the repulsive in the unrepulsive. You are trying to see this asubha in something subha. That's if I use the Pali term. There are certain things. Uh, uh, there are certain situations that time to time you need to develop these skills. So the first thing is that you need to see the asubha in subha things, which is I think which is very common, right? Like there are these asubha practices and all you've heard about, you're familiar about this idea of looking something subha in terms of asubha. You try to sort of focus on asubha aspect. But here, when Lord Buddha says subha and the asubha, he doesn't necessarily means that it doesn't means that the repulsiveness or asubhaness of the body. It's also one thing. But here the context is anything negative, anything unhelpful. That is like the asubha here. And subha is something positive, something again, it's seemingly positive, but still it is unhelpful in this context. So, for an example, it doesn't have to be you're looking at the repulsion of the body, but you're paying attention to something, some kind of a mistake or some kind of a defect on someone's character or something. Any criticism you have towards something, that is that's the asubha sanya here. So time to time, you should practice taking the perception of asubha towards something subha. That's the first one. And the second one, you are taking you practice Subha Sanya of something Asubha. You're following me, right? So sometimes you take Subha Sanya towards Asubha, sometimes you take the Asubha Sanya towards Subha. And the third one, the repulsive or the Asubha in both Subha and the Asubha. There are certain situations actually you deal with Asubha for any Subha and the Asubha. And the fourth one, Lord Buddha says, the 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 Subha in both Subha and the Asubha. The whole lot you consider, you take the perception as Subha. And the fifth one, a mendicant would do well to mediate and from time to time staying equanimous, mindfulness and aware, rejecting both the repulsive and the unrepulsive. So instead of changing the perception, as the fifth one, you're trying to change your perception to either to Subha or the Asubha, right? In this first four. But the fifth one, Lord says, instead of changing them into either Subha or Asubha, just treat, just be, you're giving up that practice for a moment and try to be equanimous. You see, you see it as it is. You try to be equanimous and be mindful instead of trying to change it to either Subha or the Asubha. So you kind of try to get rid of that the idea of the Asubha Subha altogether at that point. So how should we understand this thing? Now, if I give you examples for these cases, first thing, which is very clear to you, you try to develop asubha towards something subha. It can be towards a person, so, towards bodies and stuff. And that's a good example. Uh, and sometimes, okay, so that's the first example. How about the second case? You are trying to develop uh, uh, subha towards something asubha. How do you understand that? Now, asubha here can be you see someone actually uh, not behaving according to your expectations, and you get angry and upset about something. That kind of a in your workplace, at your household and all. And instead of focusing on their defects, on their misbehavior, you try to focus on their good deeds, their good aspects in their character. Then suddenly it's something like metta, right? So instead of trying to be negative on somebody, you try to pick up something good in them, and you change the perception. We do these things all the time, right? Sometimes it's a seemingly difficult situation, but you change your perception. Look, I'm not the only person actually going through all these things. It's just life. It changed basically that negativity into a positivity. So that's changing the perception. And how about treating both Subha and the Asubha as the Asubha? Sometimes, let's say, you're trying to focus on your meditation right now, and there are akusala thoughts come to you, in terms of the nivarnas, the hindrances. That is something you treat as asubha. That is not something you pursue. It's not something you follow, because if followed, those defilements will grow stronger. You do something about it. You have a asubha mindset towards those akusala. How about the subha ones? Sometimes seemingly a subha thing, subha means like something beautiful, also can be a hindrance for you. You might be doing some other thing uh, uh, which you consider as a good thing, but uh, this is not the right time. You just treat them as asubha altogether. Lord Buddha says sometimes when he is dwelling in the perception of emptiness, the shunyata viharana, Prabhupada says, uh, whoever comes to see him, even for, let's say, to criticize him or even to have a Dhamma sakancha, he would do like, he don't want to engage in it. He would do like, he would speak in a way that the person will immediately get up and go. That's the term. Uyojana patisanyutta kata. That's the term, Pali term, Lord Buddha says. So time to time, according to your practice and all, certain things can be categorically put into like a asubha category because that doesn't helpful right now. So I kind of be away from it. Seemingly good things sometimes, and sometimes the other way around. Uh, both the subha and the asubha you treat as a subha. If I give an example, you meet people sometimes with negative mindsets, and some, they are not friendly, they are unkind, and sometimes you meet people friendly and kind and all these good qualities, all these good qualities, but uh, as a whole, for both the subha and the asubha, things you see in them, you consider them as subha. Yeah, look, they are brothers and sisters of the samsara. They also travel in the samsara, whether they are good or bad. May they be happy and well. Something like that. Both categories actually put together into a subha. You are not picking up a certain quality there. And so those are the four aspects. And the fifth one, sometimes instead of changing the perception towards the subha or the asubha, you just sit there, just watch them as they are. Try to be equanimous. You're not entangling, you're not engaging with whatever comes in front of your mind. You try to be present, try to be mindful, and you know actually what to do with it. The best remedy is that you let go and be equanimous towards it. So that's the fifth strategy, if you like. Now, if you pay attention, if you think about this thing, you will see actually these are merely like kamathanas, some meditation methods, right? Now, if you look at the metta meditation, it's mostly you are changing the asubha into subha as metta practice. If you look at the practice of seeing the repulsiveness of the body, is basically you are changing the subha into asubha. Why change these things into one, from one to another? Because that original form, it doesn't matter whether it's subha or asubha, it is unhelpful in that context. Because of that, it needs to be changed. So hence these practices, but they are not standalone. They are not kind of dangling around in this Buddhist path. But it has this common, like it fits into a common framework. Actually, somehow you're supposed to come to the middle. Somehow you're supposed to be in the kusala, because otherwise, be that be that thing subha or asubha, if it is akusala, it doesn't help. So we need to come to the center. So let me now briefly, if I go through this traditional four traditional kamatanas in commentarial tradition, in later tradition, in meditation manuals, we see there are these four bhavanas, the four kamatanas teachers talk about. They call them as four arakas, the four protections. Now, these days, sometimes people might think that there's something, provides some kind of a special, a supernatural kind of protection. doesn't have to be like that. It might amount to such a thing also, in terms of the karma vipaka and all. But okay, what are these four Araka Bhavanas? This Araka Kamatana. The first thing is Buddhanusati. The second is the Asubha. The third one is the Metta. And the fourth one is the Maranasati. So if you pay attention, if you look at this thing, you see these things are actually, there to change the perception. If you feel like lack of energy, lack of saddha, that kind of a problem, you apply Buddhanusati. It kind of gives a boost of saddha. If you lack of, or if you are sort of having problems with the lust and stuff, Lord Buddha says apply the repulsiveness of the body perception. It will work, Lord Buddha says. If you are having problems with the anger, Lord Buddha says apply the antidote, which is the metta. And if we are complacent and if we are not sort of a diligent, in our practice, uh, you see, Lord Buddha says to develop maranasati. So these things are you can find in sutras, given these instructions were given to monks, certain individuals in certain contexts. There are so many such instructions given in the sutras. There are so many instructions, and you wonder actually how they, as I told you before, they are standalone, somehow fragmented. They are there, but somehow how these things sort of fit into the tapestry of practice. If you look at in terms of these five changing of perceptions and be equanimous, so that's the framework actually. That Buddha basically summarizes all these changing perceptions into a one practice. So that's also part of the Eightfold Path eventually, because project being that by changing these perceptions, you again try to be in the middle. Now, if I give you a story to conclude the whole, to summarize this idea of this balancing act and this the context matters. Actually, it's not just a technique, but but it's a whole sets of a set of a big set of techniques or methods or strategies altogether as practice. So, uh, maybe you heard about this teacher Ajahn. I'm sure some of you have heard about him. He is the teacher of Ajahn Brahm. So there's this story one time that at Ajahn Chah's kuti, in his meditation hut, the monks are gathered there to attend to him. It's a usual thing in Thai Forest tradition. Sometimes you are given the time, so you can see the teacher. You attend to his things and duties you perform towards your teacher, and then there's a time for you to ask questions, and you have this time with your teacher and as a group. So one time, this monk asked a question. Ajahn Chah, he asked a certain question, and Ajahn Chah answered in a certain way. And there was another monk actually in the audience, and he then had this question, and he asked Ajahn Chah like this: Ajahn, now uh, one day actually, this person asked this question, a certain time, this person asked this question, and you answered in this way. And today, this monk, asked his question, and your answer was like this. Somehow these things were like not kind of matching. They are not. They it seems like they are kind of conflicting each other. How should I understand this? Seemingly kind of a conflict here. This monk asked, because We also time to time this get this impression sometimes. Look to the talk to someone in a certain way, and talk to another person in a certain way. It seems like a little kind of a conflict, but then actually, the answer Ajahn Chah gives actually gives a kind of, to way we should understand this dynamic. So Ajahn Chah says, okay, so whatever the answer I gave to that monk the other day, that is also correct, and the answer I gave to this monk, right now is also correct, and the doubt you have regarding this matter also a valid doubt. That's also correct. And in order to understand this discrepancy, uh, he gives an analogy. He says that now they are sitting, in scooty, they're at the veranda or somewhere, looking out uh, towards the path leads to the kuti. There's this path, like a paved path made, to his kuti. So he says, imagine a person, a monk actually is coming towards Ajahn Chah's kuti. So he sees him. While he is walking towards the kuti, suddenly he deviates from that paved path and walks towards the left side. Deviates to the left. And Ajahn Chah says, what should I say to that monk, because he's supposed to come to my kuti? So what he says is that, okay, go to the right, go to the right, because you are deviating to the left, come to the right. Because once you come to the right, then you hit the path, which leads to the kuti. And there's another monk, he says, also coming towards his kuti, and this time this monk actually deviates towards the right. Then what's the instruction to that monk? And from Ajahn Chah is that, okay, you go to the left, because you deviated to the right now. You go to the left, you hit the path. I think the idea is clear. So time to time you see we somehow miss this middle mark. There's this middle path we're supposed to take, but we sort of deviate from, we goes towards this asubha and the subhanas. It basically deviates from the path. So the time to time the instruction can be different, but the idea is that you need to stay in the middle. So that's the idea. The rest actually follows according to that idea. Otherwise, these things are not like standalone instructions that you to be taken according to your sort of a choice and stuff. But these things fit into a context. That is very important to that's something important to understand. And furthermore, let's imagine this monk. In the first case, it was that he was deviating towards the left, and the instruction was that, okay, go to the right, go to the right. So that monk, having heard the instruction, now he's coming, changing his course, correcting his course, and he's hitting the middle path. But he hasn't given up that instruction yet. He keeps going further to the right, because the instruction was going to the right, right? So what happens now? Now suddenly he kind of he goes, now he goes, again to the other side of the path. Now the same thing is valid with the other instruction as well. So the second thing you need to understand is that these practices are meant to be, take to the middle, and once you come to the middle, you give up. You set that practice aside, and carry on going, carry on with your middle way. So these perceptions, time to time, you take up and you let go. You take up and you let go. These are tools. That's why in traditional sense we talk about there is this mulakammatthana. There is this one like your main meditation method, something like anapanasati or something from satipatthanas. And there are these other auxiliary sort of meditations, which I mentioned like four arakas, which is Buddhanusati, Mahanusati, Metta, Asubha, or many other things you can take up. So those are arakas in that way, right? So they protect you from deviating from the path. But you have the main sort of a meditation, the kammatthana you are practicing. So these things, there are so many things involved when you are practicing. There are so many cogwheels involved. It's not just one cogwheel you can take out and say, if you practice this, this is the real deal. That's not correct. So seeing them as a technique, uh, actually, we tend to lose a lot. So I would like to encourage you to see the bigger picture, see the suttas and, try to understand how these things sort of fit together and eventually help to understand Four Noble Truths. Because that was the first thing. The first Buddhist appeared in this world because of the Four Noble Truths. That was the first question they asked, and the rest followed afterwards. So, if you want to make that Big Bang happen once again, you need to ask the first question. What was the first question? That was is the dukkha. Then, is there anything you can do about it? That was the first question. And the rest followed. All the techniques or whatever the terms you use, it doesn't matter. It's a path, it's training, and there are so many things involved just to serve that purpose. Not for the technique's sake, not for some argument's sake, but for the purpose of liberation. So I would like to stop here. So I hope my talk explaining on things actually uh, will be helpful for your practice. I would like to encourage you to carry on with your meditation. You are sort of enrolled for this wonderful program, uh, which is sort of hosted by Ajahn Brahm Society. So now is the time. You've given up a day to practice. So I would like to encourage you to make use of that time and see uh, further into your mind and try to understand yourself. So I will stop here. So I would like to wish you all the best with your practice. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.